Hello, everyone. Welcome to Theatre's New Realities. The title of this slightly later than advertised panel is Dramaturgy. And Dramaturgy is perhaps a slightly insufficient term, really, for a panel that's interested in the broader project of storytelling, but also of world building, indeed all of the ways one can curate the experience of an audience in and through the worlds of a performance that has been enhanced, challenged, layered, complicated by its integration with virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence and machine learning, motion capture, technological enhancement and mediation, and much more. Sometimes technologies like this are posed against theatre, constructed as a kind of anti-theatre, something that dilutes it, taking it away from some kind of theatrical essence. But on this panel, I think we want to think differently about that relationship, thinking about how these technologies can enhance and in some ways intensify theatre's particular dynamics, but also how artistic work with these technologies can maybe learn from the theatre's long traditions. My name is Dan Rebellato. I'm Professor of Contemporary Theatre here at Royal Holloway. I say here, very much aware that, that these kind of technologies complicate the meanings of words like here and there. Joining me to talk about these issues, we have three experts, indeed pioneers in the field of intermediality and performance. Eric Joris is a transdisciplinary artist and researcher who's been pioneering immersive media for almost 20 years with the Crew Collective, which brings together artists and scientists to build VR and alt-R projects anchored almost always in the physical body. Crew's live performances and installations have been shown at major festivals and conferences across the world. And one of their recent projects has been an evolving engagement with the play Hamlet, about which we will be hearing much more on this panel. Chiel Kattenbelt is an associate professor in intermediality at Utrecht University, but I think he's about to change institutions, maybe to Arnhem next week, perhaps. He is the co-founder of the working group Intermediality in Theatre and Performance at IFTR, and his research is partly practice-based and has also worked with Crew on the Hamlet Project. And Aneta Mancewicz, I am delighted to say, is my colleague in the Department of Drama, Theatre and Dance at Royal Holloway, University of London. Her research focuses on Shakespearean performance, intermediality and European theatre. She's the author of Intermedial Shakespeares on European Stages and the co-editor of Intermedial Performance and Politics in the Public Sphere, and also Local and Global Myths in Shakespearean Performance. She's also worked with Crew on the Hamlet Project. Just a reminder that you can ask your questions live, so please do enter them into the chat, and I will do my best to weave them in as elegantly as I can to the discussion. And there'll be a little bit of time for a wider discussion at the end of this session. But Aneta, maybe I could turn to you first, just to give us a kind of outline of the Hamlet Project, and in particular its various phases.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So it's delightful to be here with Eric and Chiel. There have been also other collaborators that perhaps we should mention, Robin Nelson, Orland, which is a Dutch collective, and particularly Marin and Thomas, who are involved in directing and acting within this performance, and also Mesut Arslan, who came in later, because this project has been going for a number of years and had various iterations. We started back in 2015 when we came up with the idea, this is what we wanted to do, but then the work began in 2016. And it had three distinctive iterations, which each of them had a distinctive name as well. So we created an installation called Hands on Hamlet, and this was the very first piece, which we toured at various conferences. The first one was at the University of Gdańsk in Poland, as part of the European Shakespeare Research Association conference. And this was an installation where people could come in for a few minutes and experience VR. And it was slightly custom-based, as you could say, because the technician was present and was changing the material live for audience members. We'll talk about its iterations in a minute. And this was a project that was a very early version of Hamlet. We never meant to a full adaptation of the text and never meant to be faithful. But the idea was to try out certain bits about technology and certain ways of creating audience experience. And we also gathered a lot of feedback, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then the second part of the project was Hamlet Encounters, which was shown at KWS here in Brussels. This was a longer piece. I think it was about perhaps 40 minutes long. And it put audience members in 4 different groups that could experience the piece in rotation. They were all in one big space. And in those 4 groups, they could experience all kinds of technologies. They were able to experience virtual reality, but equally, some of them were able to put motion capture suits, which I think was something that we really were keen on trying, but it had its own problems and kind of challenges, because if you have to put people in the suits, explain them how things work, that creates certain tensions in terms of the dynamic of the performance. But it was also an exciting piece in terms of helping us try out different things and different technologies and how we could structure this experience for the audience. And then the third piece was Hamlet's Lunacy, which was also presented at KWS. KWS is a municipal theater in the center of Brussels. And it was a piece that perhaps is the most theatrical. And it, again, I think lasts something like 40 minutes, an hour. And it is a piece which is in which audience members go on a journey. They're being guided by Jerry Killick, whom you'll see this afternoon in another piece by Crew. And Jerry is a particular kind of guide who allows us to be immersed in this experience. And we have moments where there are VR immersions for audience members. There are moments where audience members can observe other people being immersed. The whole experience also has elements of AR. And it's a piece that actually is kind of more dramaturgically developed, and we see as kind of the latest and perhaps the most mature bit of the project. But what we think about in terms of this project is a project in progress. We still want to develop this and work on this further.
Great, thank you very much, Aneta. And I will ask you later about the possible future development of the project. Eric, am I right in thinking you have some visual images that will help illustrate that process?
Yes. Yeah. Just share my screen. Wait, it's not showing up.
It's showing up on our screens.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you put it into motion now? Because I cannot handle it from here.
You have to press play, apparently.
I don't see any play button here. Wait. Wait. I stopped my screen sharing and I do it again because, yeah, I have no means to. Okay, I'll do it over. I think there's another way because I have no button here. I can manage it. Unless this does something. It's running?
No.
No, okay.
Would you like us to come back to this? Or
now you should see it. Now you should see it, right?
Yes, and it's.
Yeah, you do? Okay. Stop playing. Okay. So you have no sound, I guess, huh?
No.
We see here, this is the, yeah. This is the, wait, I go further. That's the part I want to show. This is where you see the actors rehearsing. This is the motion capture filming. So we scan the actors and then we have them moving like this. And at the same time, we record the video. So this is a computer graphics with one of the results. We'll go a bit further. This was checking with the dramaturgians to see what we could do with it. Right, I'm looking. Right, yeah, here you have some images. Right. So, so this is the hands-on Hamlet part. So that was for one visitor or one participant at a time. This again is a recording. And you see a part of the 3D scans inside. Right. I'll try to get, sorry for scratching, but I want to go back to the beginning. And you'll see here, yeah. So what you see here, okay. So what you see here is, so these are the scanned actors that are moving, and of course we scanned also some interior of buildings of a castle here, a 17th century castle. And in the world which you walk through as an immersant, as we call that person, you also have these kind of spheres, these bubbles floating around. And if you, as an immersant, if you walk inside, because you physically walk around in the space, in VR as well, and you put your head in one of these bubbles, then you end up in the same thing, but then in video. Since this, we always recorded video and motion at the same time. So yeah, so you have a very brief view of, oh, here you go in, and now you see the actors rehearsing, and so that is what you then see of how the actor behaves. So that gives you a very brief idea of how hands-on Hamlet was constructed. The advantage was it was for one person at a time, so we went together with Chiel, Aneta, Robin. We went around in Europe, so people could experience it. We got feedback from them. What is working? What is not working? How do you experience this? Has it anything to do with Shakespeare? Are you listening to the text? All these kind of things. All these kind of things were very useful. And so based upon that research, we made a first proposal on a larger scale. I cannot show that because the images are not any good. That was a very complicated one in which the immersed, so the spectators once were watching, then the next step got codes, motion capture suits, and then were in motion capture themselves. Driving avatars, others a bit further on were watching and meeting. So you already hear what a kind of complex. And the problematic part was that you had to go from one part to another. Now that principle we got from Terra Nova. Terra Nova was also built like that, but there it worked very fluently, very well. But here with taking out the suits and all that kind of thing, it was too complicated. It took you out of the experience, so to say. So we moved on to another stage, of which I will show you an example in a minute. And that is then by having everybody moving together with one or two immersants. We see on screens what they are doing. There's a live actor. The actor is live performing. Is being motion captured in a more simple way, and that is fed back to the person inside. And of course, so it's the inside and the outside. They both need to be a spectacle, a piece at the same time. So the inside and the outside, so that yeah, you have these two movements ongoing all the time. I suggest, since I skipped by accident what I prepared, I suggest that some of you take over while I go and put the next thing ready. That's okay.
So there's, Aneta, you said there are these three phases. There's this hands-on Hamlet that we've just seen some video images from, Hamlet Encounters and Hamlet's Lunacy. Starting with hands-on Hamlet, can I take you back to the choice of Hamlet? I mean, what is it about Hamlet that responds or connects to our current age, and I suppose particularly our technological moment? Why Hamlet? You're on mute, by the way.
Thank you. It's interesting because the project began explicitly by us thinking we wanted to work with Hamlet. So it wasn't that we were thinking, okay, we've got technology in place, and what can we do with it? Technology became a tool for us to explore this particular playtext. What we were looking at were a number of things. I think the key aspect of Hamlet that we were interested in was how this play was written in a very complex historical moment that was both politically quite turbulent, but equally with all the questions around succession and political unrest and uncertainty about what was going to happen in the kingdom. But equally, we were interested in a bigger philosophical, intellectual shift that was taking place between the move from the thinking that characterized the medieval mindset into more Renaissance, modern kind of thinking. So we're also looking at explorations that were taking place in such fields as astronomy and science, but also changes in law. And we felt that this was a play that was poised in a moment of a big shift, when something was finishing and something new hasn't yet formed. And when we started working on this project, we were in the middle of a migration crisis. And in fact, it was quite a poignant experience because we were working in Brussels at the time when terrorist attacks took place. And then we had terrorist attack in London. So, and in fact, we felt this atmosphere with soldiers coming and police carrying guns on the street. So it just felt like we're in a very precarious moment when there is a big shift, when there is crisis, and we still haven't found ways to deal with it and to think about this productively. And we felt that Hamlet is an example of a thinking mind, a man who is trying to come to terms with what's happening around him. And because we've had other shifts and other crises since then, it seems like, the play could have other relevance in other contexts. And in terms of technology, it seems that Shakespeare's plays are great litmus papers for any changes in technology, because his own dramaturgy is so rich and so complex that it just invites experiments with whatever new tools you have at hand. And I think it's no surprise and no accident that all new tools that we have at our disposal, we go back to Shakespeare, try how would it work with Shakespeare, and Hamlet is usually the one where we try things out.
Thank you. And some of the images we saw there, obviously we're seeing kind of avatars, and we're seeing kind of virtual actors that are connected to physical actors through things like motion capture. I wondered how far you thought the relationship between the virtual actor and the physically embodied actor, is that something that in a sense is thematic? Because I suppose I'm thinking that Hamlet, as you say, is a play that is about all those things you talk about, but it's also, of course, a play about theatre and about acting and action. And I wondered how far you felt there was a sort of conceptual, a virtuous loop there between the play and the technology in that particular respect.
Absolutely, and we felt that Hamlet is one of those plays that provides you with a very well-known meta-theatrical framework where you look at rehearsal and a performance within the play itself. So we embedded this particularly within Hands on Hamlet, but it also was present in other iterations of the project where the audiences could see the making of it and could see the actors rehearsing the roles. And I think Jerry has been fabulous in terms of bringing that out in Hamlet's Lunacy, but equally Tomasz Dudkiewicz, an actor we worked with in Brussels earlier, he's been also brilliant about the playfulness and the kind of trying out different roles, because Hamlet is also about playing and putting on a show for the sake of the people in the play and the audience sitting and watching it.
Chiel, I wonder if I could just draw you in at this moment. Partly, yeah. I wanted to ask about fiction, actually, which is obviously a play, and indeed the play within a play are kind of fictions that bear on reality. There are ideas around that what virtual reality is about is creating these perfect illusions. in a sort of quasi-cinematic way, or has it sort of seemed to me that maybe you were doing something different, because the theatre is not often very successfully illusionistic. So I wondered if you had some thought about how the audience is situated in relation to the fictional world.
Yeah, well, when I deal with different media, I always wonder what do they have in common, in what sense are they different? And I noticed that a lot of the discourse on virtual reality is indeed about creating a world in which you are completely immersed and the illusion should be perfect. And the only thing we have to deal with is how can the technology be so sophisticated that it can indeed align with the sophisticated sensitivity of our senses. Whereas I think with regard to theater, this is not the most obvious way to deal with virtual reality. So if you use the technology for the sake of creating a virtual world, which seemed to be as lifelike and real as the physical world around us, then I would suggest leave theater out of this. Just use theater in as far as it can be useful, a useful platform for other media to be staged. And what I think theater and virtual reality might have in common, that it can both easily function as a kind of hypermedium. There is already a long history for the theater to provide a stage for other media, which means that the other media are not just presented, but at the same time staged, with all the theatrical implications of this act of staging. Whereas in the case of virtual reality, it can also easily provide a stage for other media to be performed, but always under the conditions of being digital. And being digital provides us many ways of how to connect the different media to one another. On the one side, it can easily play with the materialities of different media. They can easily transform the materialities of the different media as these are used. And they can be connected in all kinds of ways, as we can also, as human beings, doing it in our own mind. So what I really like about virtual reality is that it has, in a way, a kind of intelligence as a medium, as we can easily recognize in our world, but not so much in the sense of linear storytelling. In other words, I like virtual reality way more as a medium to create mind spaces than to create worlds with which we are familiar with in the physical world around us. What I'm mainly interested in is how are we positioned by a specific medium, and what does the medium provide us in terms of what we can do with it and what the medium does with us. And with virtual reality, we have a very powerful medium in terms of radically redefining our senses and to redefine our body in relation to what we receive with our senses.
Thank you. That is fascinating. I'm going to return to a lot of those questions a little in a moment, actually. But Eric, can I ask you, just picking up on that, that interesting question about what the relationship is between virtual reality and illusion? Because in those images that you showed us, I was very struck that in that highly coloured image early on, sort of in a room in a castle, there seemed to be a very deliberate design aesthetic that was drawing attention to artificiality. It seemed to me that some of the textures appeared to be quite frayed. The colours are heightened and sort of non-realistic. What can you talk a little bit about, I suppose, the design decisions there?
Yeah, so that's absolutely correct. So if you just reproduce what we know, then it is not so interesting. And we made high resolution scans of a very good quality of a 17th century castle, and then it turned quickly out. It doesn't work. So it's so if we take it apart, if we distort it, if we then it's much better. In fact, we worked with different sets of scanners. The worst scanner we had produced the most interesting results. So the image was incomplete. So you got a very spacious type of structure where you could see through, but exactly the fact you could see through, which already at the spatial level was interesting because you see better what is in front and what is behind, and so you see the movement, the connection between the two. But also the view it gave was much more fascinating. And maybe from the outside, if you look at it without knowing it, it looks maybe a bit like science fiction, floating structures and things like that. But it doesn't feel at all like that. And it was a very simple test we could do, for instance, with hand-drawn Hamlets. So we had assembled the different rooms just near to each other, on top of each other. And so there was a way to go from one room to the other, in a way physical. But anyway, so they were just stick together. And then at a certain moment, we have the immersion inside go and sit down in a virtual chair, which we produce and which is also real. So it says, oh, okay, so these kind of little things, which are a bit cheap in a way, they do work. You had to go down, and going down, the thing changes. So that's always like, oh, so people get in an alert mode, which is good. And so when they finally sit down, then we have the camera. That's the first time the camera move dissociated from them. And so the camera then moves, and so then they go back through the walls, and then they see the whole structure. Now, in itself, as I said, this looks like a kind of a classic science fiction type of thing, buildings floating in the air. But it always worked, because you can see it at the reactions of the people. Now, if you would start with that image, it wouldn't be that reaction. So it is really using the virtual, the illusion, in a kind of suggestion that it works. And we didn't need to do many things ourselves. For instance, many people, maybe because they are kind of professional people at these conferences, immediately drew the link. You have these people coming through you. You're not being used to that, and so so when they walk through them, it's like, oops. For anyone who plays games or so, this is absolutely normal. But so they immediately make the association. Oh, so you are the ghost inside. So we are the ghosts. So what? So the people make these associations themselves very easily. So you can use that. And so in terms of your question, which was then the artificial world, the final result is even much more artificial. And so it's really floating debris a bit everywhere. And what was working very well in the final thing we made. So we know from experience that the act of moving is important. So you move in a virtual world. Normally you move in a virtual world by using a button and you teleport yourself from here to here. But if you can really walk, let's say, run 30 meters, because we made you run in the end, and then you have all these things you walk through and you are in the scene, you're already out it. So that really works in a very immersive way, which is not realistic at all.
And that's it. That's very interesting, I think, because certainly a lot of the discourses around immersive theater are very much about kind of it being very unmediated, much more real, much more direct, and yet it seems to me what you're all talking about actually is a sort of alienated immersiveness, so that you are completely surrounded by a built, constructed virtual world, but yet it's not one that you're supposed in any sense to think, I am really part of this, that actually you're constantly aware of its sort of fictionality, if you see what I mean. Is that right?
Exact, because you need to construct that, and it works on a very simple level. So for instance, you can introduce a highly realistic scan of the person, highly realistic with face tracking, things like that. The strange thing is that you will immediately notice, it's not really realistic, or there's a slight mistake here and here. So but if you start from the other point, you use like a skeleton. So a skeleton, I mean, kind of a kind of Pinocchio type of simple shape.
Yeah.
And you deal with that, and then people notice, oh, but this must be, the movements are real, or this is here and now. So you start projecting the real inside of that, and that works much better. So you're really, this is real, I'm in here, this is tactile or not, I can take this. But that kind of doubt is much more interesting than going straight to oh, we must be here, or it doesn't work. So the construct, the fact that you're all the time constructing that, and coming to something which is kind of real, because if it's all fake, then it wouldn't work. So it is. Some actors are real, some are real time. So that kind of things are good to know. And I think that's theater. That's playing with it here and now. And
absolutely, thank you, Aneta and Chiel. I wanted to ask a bit about the third iteration of the Hamlet project, Hamlet's Lunacy, and I guess that title is both referring us to the psychology, that sense of selfhood that we're talking about, and also there's something cosmological, isn't there? There's a reference to the moon in the title. Aneta, maybe I'll ask you this first question. So Hamlet obviously has been famously described as a play about the emergence of a new kind of subjectivity, a sort of liberal humanist experience of individual consciousness. And I wonder how far you think the technology works with that or against that in a sense. Is it about giving us an intensified experience of that kind of individual subjectivity, or is it about tracking the emergence of a different, maybe more dispersed or fragmented sense of psychology? A light one for you to deal with.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I also love how you've picked the lunacy with the lunar reference, because astronomy has been a really important part of this piece. Mm-hmm. I think what's exciting about Hamlet is that on the one hand, it is about this emerging subjectivity, but it's also about the schizophrenia in the play. Schizophrenia that is both the madness of Hamlet, but also madness of Ophelia, for instance, who's also a very important character who's been understood, particularly in the 20th century, as a schizophrenic character. So there is this idea about madness, but also madness that allows you to become a different persona and experience yourself differently. And what we felt technology was allowing us to do was playing with different personas, different states of mind, mental spaces. And it was something we also discovered early on in the process, that it was important to have a charismatic actor who would be a guide in that space. And this is, I think, something that reappears as a thread in all the panels today, that it's great to have technology in place, but it's also lovely when you have a live performer who leads you through that, who adds a different dimension. Ollie today was talking about the performer providing potentially live safeguarding issues, but also performer gives a sense of grounding in the here and now. And what I think was very exciting about the last iteration of the project, and what emerged already in the second one, was the idea of the actor who was guiding through the performance, who played Hamlet, exploring his different personas and making us constantly questioning, who is he in this play? And with Jerry, it became very clear when he was constantly playing with us and making us aware of different roles that he was occupying, and then letting us into the virtual world, which was his world, but also our world. So this was, I think, the idea of dispersion, the idea of multiple subjectivities being at play, and this idea of alienation that you've mentioned. So never being really sure what is being created and what is real, what is fictional here, and always negotiating that experience, and technical sometimes glitches that were kind of making you aware of the fact that this was all created in front of your eyes, was something that we were also striving to evoke, so that there was no sense of smoothness, but the sense of jarring, rough edges throughout.
That's very interesting, particularly the as you say, the glitches as being kind of constitutive of the experience rather than a falling away of the experience. Chiel, I suppose this is still a question really about subjectivity, but I'm picking up on something you said earlier, because whenever I've been engaged as an participant, as an audience member of one of these sort of virtual reality shows, there's always a point in the show where I kind of think, am I doing something with the technology, or is the technology doing something with me? And I wondered whether you had particular views on that, about which is the tool, the technology or us?
Well, I think that we need to be very clear about what is it that the technology does with me and what is it that I can do with the technology. So very often I experience being in a virtual world that I wonder, am I supposed to do something in order to make something happen? Am I doing what they want me to do in order to find out what's going on in this world? To what extent am I supposed to be aware of not seeing my own body and at the same time trying to negotiate with my body with regard to what I perceive with my eyes and ears? Am I in a specific way guided through this world, or do I have to find out in which way I should navigate through this world? All uncertainties about all this in a way destroys your experience. Whereas I think that theater can never compete with other media when it comes to creating perfect illusions. Since you always have to recognize, in as far as illusion is the case in theater, you should recognize the reality of the illusion, that it is constructed. You need the transparency in order to make us aware where we are, being in the here and now. So that's why I think that the next step for our project is to further elaborate the idea that with the technologies that we have to provide the audience with a playground. You really have to play with the tools in order to find out how you can redefine your senses and what this redefinition means in terms of how I relate to the world. So even the imperfection of the technology is a key for understanding what it means if we are defamiliarized or alienated or whatsoever.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Actually, we have a question that's come up from Joanna Bucknell, which is just wanting perhaps to draw out a little bit more the role of the body and the awareness of the corporeality of the body as a kind of an emergent experience in this work.
I mean,
how is you thinking about that developed through this project, would you say?
I mean, you should recognize that when you wonder in the case of virtual reality, where is the stage where the performance is taking place? I would say your body. Being in a virtual world is always, in one way or the other, a kind of intensified experience of your own body. The disappearance of the body makes it more present than being physically there, taking for granted, so to say. And in that sense, Crew has a long history with experimenting in all kinds of ways with what happens to the body of the immersant.
And I wonder, there's something about vulnerability, isn't there, as well? I think particularly with, if you've got a VR headset on, I always have that simultaneous sense of having extra perception and also being blind, because I don't know what's happening outside my real body, if you see what I mean. Whereas I'm seeing through walls and into other worlds and that sort of thing. Eric, can I ask you a little bit about liveness? Because obviously liveness is fundamental in theatre. It's far less important in cinema, for example. Where do you think this kind of work sits in relation to liveness, perhaps between those theatrical and cinematic poles?
Well, liveness is crucial. That's what we found from the very beginning. So when we started, the first years we were working with video. So basically VR based on video, on the direction of video. You were walking through buildings. You had a body, you had no body. Was it your body? I mean, you can play with time and space in a very good way. I'm sorry, I lost my line. I'm sorry, I was just disturbed for a moment.
So the liveness.
The liveness, yes, thank you.
The liveness is crucial.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, if it is pre-recorded, it only works if you can juxtapose it with something that is real. In the other case, you are simply watching television or something with a headset on, and maybe, and then even if you start walking around, it doesn't work. So the liveness, even if I move in a VR world, which is not live, but I move through it and it adapts to me, that is already a kind of liveness. If the figures come to me, even if they've been previously constructed, there is a kind of liveness. So there is a degree in the amount of liveness you can have. But the interesting things we had the first years was that if you play with the here and now in contrast to the things which have been filmed before or just before or things like that, then you get a very strange thing which is called an out-of-body feeling, out-of-body phenomenon. So when we first had that, it was very quickly. Yeah? So it's, oh, where did it come from? We had no idea why does the medium nearly automatically seems to generate these kind of things. If you would only be using prepared images, that wouldn't work. If you would only try to produce the illusion you are there somewhere else, there is something else happening, it wouldn't work. So, but it did work if you had this continuous thing against each other. You're here, you're not here. This is you, this is not you. This is now, this is not now. But I mean, I just say it in a very systematic way, but of course you needed kind of a dramaturgy to build it up. And then you had this very strange phenomenon, which you don't have in any other medium. Like, then people literally ask, how can he be there when I'm standing here? So, well, the logical answer is, well, we call it a camera. The camera is filming you from there. But how come that I experience suddenly that I'm there? So that's the thing you construct. As I said, it's only a camera, but it's a construction. Because the way you experience the media brings a certain confusion in your body. As Chiel named it, in a way you lose your body, and because you lose it, there's a kind of wish to get it back from somewhere, and you construct something. And so that's where these kind of things come from. And so that's where we think. Yeah? So the VR should be in between, in the middle of these two worlds, in between the here and now. So in between. So it's always this little shift. And the point is that the point where you will find yourself as an immersant, as we call him, is literally depending upon the way you're thinking or your feeling or your mind. So you can position yourself in that way. And with the outer bodies, you can really do it. So, this is I, this is not I. You can, it really works that way. But so these were the experiments of the first years, which were based on video. It is working less this way with VR. That is, anyway, a bit more artificial. But anyway, so the basis of it still remains valid. So you construct a body. Yes, you need it. And for that, you need a kind of a build-up. So to gain trust, you cannot fool people inside. So that people really also let their body go or something like that. So,
yeah. Thank you. And Aneta, I want to ask you a question about narrative. This might have to be the last question about the Hamlet Project. It's about the place of narrative in this kind of work. And I'm kind of interested in the way that Hamlet is both a linear narrative and a kind of non-linear narrative, because of course Hamlet is set off on a very linear task, you know, revenge, do this very particular thing, there's a goal. But of course the play is all about Hamlet disrupting and interrupting and deferring and delaying that linearity to some extent. And the soliloquies are kind of almost stop time in a certain kind of way. And then you have along the way, of course, people are really interested in Hamlet because of the texture of the language and the thought and the moment and so on. So I suppose my question is, what kind of narrative shapes do you think these technologies favor, produce? What's the place of narrative in this kind of work?
It's a great question. And I think what we were very keen to do working with Hamlet, and that's why also Hamlet is so great, because it disrupts certain expectations about revenge tragedy, which again has to do with the historical period and changes in revenge law. We kind of decided that VR would be a sad medium if it were only used for following a linear narrative. And this is also about how, if you think about VR in terms of cinema, which is something that Jonathan Thonon talked about in the previous panel, how this cinematic perspective can be quite limiting and can impose a certain way of viewing where you're passively observing events unfolding in front of you, and the camera, and it's almost like the VR then takes the role of a camera. It leads your view, and it doesn't really do much with the affordance of the technology, which is the one which is more theatrical, where you can decide where you look and what you watch. So I think what we were trying to do in this project, and also via those very different iterations of the project, was discovering different ways of narrative and dramaturgy and structuring this story. And so the first one was perhaps something that was quite dual, where you were in between two worlds, two virtual worlds. So you were either looking at this disintegrated castle and the actors being in costume and playing the roles. And we've selected a few scenes that we thought were quite important to showcase this important historical shift, but that were not necessarily following straight narrative. It wasn't an adaptation that was covering the key pieces, the key moments in the play. But you could also look at the making of it. So we're kind of in those two realities. So kind of the narrative structure, if you'd say, was about being in between, being in the making and the actual effect. Then with the second one, it was about exploring different aspects of the historical, astronomical, political shifts, but kind of through 4 various ways of engagement with theater. And then in the third one, it was about following Jerry on a journey in which we no longer know who is the person in front of us and what is the story, and we're constantly being put in front of the story that is not clear. So in a sense, what brings those 3 pieces together, what is our key to understanding narrative, is an understanding of narrative as something that is constantly constructing itself in front of the audience eyes, and it's constantly shifting as it's being made. So it's always about the process as well as product, and it's something that Chiel and I have been working on in terms of kind of modernist approaches to VR, right? And the kind of modernist genealogies to VR, and the focus on process, the focus on the making, and the audience as the participant and the maker.
Thank you.
I would add to what Aneta said. So in order to find out what you can do with virtual reality, I think we need to revisit the aesthetic procedures of the historical avant-garde, as has been argued by Clemens Gruber, in terms of making the process itself visible, in terms of combining and collecting all kinds of things together. So to emphasize the hybridity of the worlds as you create them, in terms of you make all kinds of connections in which the way you remake and recycle and that kind of things. And of course, we also should recognize the interactivity that's provided by the technology. So what is it that I can do in terms of play with the tools, in terms of maybe also be an agent yourself in the way you redefine your senses and wonder how it feels. So
absolutely,
there is a lot to do.
Eric.
Yeah, can I just mention something? So going back to your question, in the last Hamlet, we made the agency was a type of question which is linked to VR and to any kind of medium. What kind of agency can you have? We are convinced that the more agency, well, you need a kind of agency to really be involved. But if it's completely interactive, then of course the story will disappear. So it's kind of a balance, the curation you need. But then in the case of Hamlet, we wanted to look together as Hamlet. What is Hamlet's agency? What in his time? So what was his agency? And so we tried to work on that by having those 2 things together, because his agency was not as wide as you would think. So there was a lot of reflection there, and so we tried to.
So I keep Eric all the time. Can you create a space, a virtual space, in which you real-time create that space. Eric is a great, he can make great drawings. I want him to draw live the virtual space. And I also want the immersion to do something in order to make that space appear, so to say. So we need to further develop the agency of the immersion, because hanging around in a space where you are not noticed at all, or don't have an idea of what is it that I can do in order to make something happen, then I would suggest let's stick to cinema.
Thank you. We have got a couple of questions in the chat, which I'd like to just run by you. So Maya Chowdhury has asked, do you know of any VR theatre projects that use there it is on screen, participatory theatre or applied theatre to create the play?
To create a play, you mean whereby you would be changing the script and things like that, or I mean like that?
Yeah. Generating a whole kind of story, a kind of VR process.
I mean, we are maybe not so far yet to create a play, but I would say let's first create a playground in order to play and find out how you can, while playing, create a play.
Thank you. And Josh Elliott has asked a very practical question, actually. What comes first, the world or the story or the technology? Or should we be writing stories for certain technology or looking for tools that best serve the story? So what comes first, the story or the technology?
I think it's such a brilliant question. And I think, and I think it probably, in some cases, might depend on the project. I mean, I think we were keen to work with a particular story, but particular world as well. I think from the beginning, we were also very keen to think about Hamlet as multiple stories and multiple worlds. So I think also it's important to be able to be open to the text as a world itself. And I think that was something we worked with. But I think equally you might have a technology and you might wonder what you do with it. So I think that's this duality that is really exciting. How can VR and AR be used in theater, but also how can theater help us to think about extending VR?
Yeah, and sometimes there is already a story like Hamlet, but maybe it's way more important to derive from that story a kind of basic idea where you would like to start from. So if you start from the idea Hamlet is the first modern mind on the European stage, and if you start from the idea that the character Hamlet is much broader than the story in which he appears, and when you recognize in the story something as a world represented that is out of joint, then you have already so many instruments in your hands in order to find out how can we make experiences with the new technologies that come close to what you recognize in Hamlet's world, in Hamlet, the play, so to say. And we recognized indeed from the start this meta level in Hamlet. So it's easy to conceive Hamlet as being the director of the play. So when we said, Jerry, you are guiding us in the last iteration, you're guiding us through your world. So you're not Hamlet. You are the guide who plays with us, like Hamlet plays with Ophelia and with Claudius. And with
Thank you. And Eric, the question of agency leads us, I think, a little bit onto one of your current projects called Homesick. We only have a couple of minutes, unfortunately, so this is going to be necessarily tantalizing, and there's going to be, of course, a fuller presentation of work this evening as part of the conference. But could you briefly just give us a glimpse of what this work is?
It's also an answer to the previous question, because also here we start with the story, and then you start playing with new kind of tools, and then you say, oh, well, this doesn't work at all with this kind of story, so we need to, and then you experiment with technology, and then something comes out. So this is the kind of world we need to create. This is the kind of story, if we need a story, that will come out of it, or no story at all. So that's how it goes. So actually the tools we are using is from an elder performance. We made literally based upon something you said in Oedipus Rex 2006, 2007, the who is seeing, who is not seeing. So the man who is blind is the only one who sees. So so the metaphor is clear. So we made something for an immersive, and for the audience to watch it, we had little laptops running around on wheels to have a kind of AR. So during the lockdown, of course, we couldn't do anything. So we thought, okay, let's take this old stuff back and let's try to see, can we do something in Zoom with them? So instead of having just a screen share, can we do something? Yeah, can we use this old technology in Zoom? So it's low tech, it's old tech. It was pretty complicated, but so and so we are playing with something. Of course, there will not be full interactivity because you will be watching, but we'll be doing something with you. And Chiel coined the term interpassivity, and it comes close to that. So we'll be doing something with you, and one person, in the future it should be many persons, one person is able to have agency or full interactivity, and who will be able to, from his house out, to drive around in the world together with the others. So that is how we hope that Zoom can be something more than just watching, but that you can really participate and get into each other's world, partly physically. Laptop is partly physical, so so that is a bit what the performance is about. So it's a kind of experiment. Yeah. And
what time is that tonight? It is tonight, isn't it?
6. Oh wait, 6 European time. That means 5 UK time.
UK time.
Right, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, look, we are kind of out of time because we are running slightly late, but thank you very much to Eric, Chiel, and Aneta. Really fascinating conversation about the dramaturgy of these new technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.